Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shape of one of the huge planet killers the ancient Guardians had built eons ago. It was a huge blob on the radar screens and had been towed here for repairs. A plan began to form in my mind. Another flash happened and I heard a thump, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Kaltar was on the ground. His eyes were open and fixed, showing no response. Blood ran from his mouth onto the floor. The woman Tursa was crouched over him and began to openly sob over his body. Without further hesitation, I folded space for the ancient Guardian ship. It was our only hope. I arrived on the huge ship's bridge to find the last of the crew preparing to evacuate. I looked at the closest Guardian and said, "I am Satu-Ra, who is in command here." I don't know what he was thinking, but he snapped, "You are, sire." It wasn't the right answer, but there was no more time for talk. "If this ship will move, it needs to get going," I snapped back. The Guardian tried to grasp my meaning. He said, "This ship is almost 8,000 miles long, and there are just a few hundred of us. We can't go into combat." "It's not a battleship today, it's an umbrella," I growled as I scanned the control panels. "I want to put this ship between the rocks and the surface." The Guardian abruptly seemed to grasp my meaning. He yelled, "I need help here," then stepped over to a large set of controls on the far side of the ship's bridge and started to reset controls. A man and a woman came running in, and the first Guardian I spoke to flashed them instructions in the link. Their hands flew over the controls, and the gigantic ship slowly started to edge forward, picking up speed. I saw the course control board and stepped closer. I was placing a lot of faith in this old ship, but it was all we had that was big enough for my purpose. The ship's controlling mind wasn't operational. I had seen the reports on the repairs, and our people were uncertain how to fix that. We need to fly this ship on manual. I turned to the Guardian standing next to me and said, "I'm ordering you to abandon ship. Take your people and get out of here." The Guardian stood a little taller and said, "We won't leave you here like this." There was no time for words. I ignored his insubordination and said, "We're going to need to skim the atmosphere for this to work. Once we are on course, you must leave. This ship will be pulverized." The Guardian nodded and started making small corrections to the course I had plotted in. The ship was making good headway now, and I started to look at the rest of the control panels. I could see the remains of the meteor storm were ready to hit. 90% of the meteors had been vaporized by Kaltar. What remained would still obliterate the people on Signiac Taurus. Almost my entire family would be wiped out. Failure was not an option. The giant Guardian ship lurched as the first meteor hit. Almost at once, a fire began inside one of the control panels. Few Guardians present were trying to put the fire out, but it looked hopeless. There just weren't enough people to fight the fire and guide the ship. Again and again, I felt the rocks slam into the ancient Guardian ship. A huge noise rumbled past us, and I heard the screaming sound of atmosphere escaping into the vacuum of space. There was a loud scream, and I looked over just in time to see a Guardian being sucked out into space. The emergency doors slammed shut, and the ship's bridge was effectively cut off from the rest of the ship. I could feel hundreds of impacts hitting the ship, and could tell by the instruments that the spacecraft was being ripped to pieces. One after another, ship systems showed the huge vessel being ripped open, but there was nothing left pressurized on the ship except the place where we stood. Despite the horrific damage to the ship, it appeared my plan was working. Only a few of the rocks had hit the surface and appeared to have done no real damage. I stood looking at the ship's controls and only saw one real problem. The Guardian ship was starting to fall out of orbit. If it hit the planet's surface, it would be almost as bad as the meteor storm hitting. I programmed in the course corrections to leave orbit with the remains of the old Guardian ship. I just had to hope the ship's main engines would hold out. I could still feel an occasional meteor hitting the ship, but the worst seemed to be over. The Guardian standing next to me at the controls watched me making the course adjustments and said, "The ship's main jump engines are functional." I'd seen enough of the ship's reports to know that that was a recent development. "Are you sure?" I asked desperately. I stepped over to the controls for the jump engines, and sure enough, they showed a fully charged engine ready to fire. I set the controls and turned to the Guardian standing beside me and said, "I'm serious. Get your people and get out." The Guardian had seen the control settings I'd fed in. He knew what I was getting ready to do. He just smiled and said, "It's been a pleasure serving with you, my lord." Then the last few Guardians on the ship folded space, leaving me alone on the vessel. I knew better than to hesitate and keyed the jump engine. I heard the roar as the engines released the energy to fold space. There was instantly a huge crash, and the ship started to come apart. The ship had made the jump as instructed. I directed it to form right in the middle of the enemy fleet. Flames roared from every control panel in the place, and I fell to the floor. I looked up as a large monitor tore loose from its mounts and came down hard on my legs. There was a sharp pain, and I knew at least one of my legs was broken. I tried to focus to fold space, but the pain was incredible. I couldn't focus my thoughts and began to scream from the pain. Through the smoke and flames, I saw a shadow moving toward me. I suddenly realized it was Kate. She saw me, and the look on her face spoke volumes. "Get out of here," I commanded her, my voice just short of a scream. "Just shut the hell up," she yelled back at me. Her eyes cast around till she spied a broken length of support beam on the floor. Just as she grabbed for it, Tucker appeared. He instantly saw what Kate was thinking, grabbed the beam, and leveraged the monitor off my legs. I screamed as pain flooded my mind, and without further comment, Kate pulled me up off the floor by the arm and folded space, dragging me with her as she went. Kate slowly let me slide to the ground. I found myself lying in tall grass on the planet's surface. The sky appeared to be on fire as thousands of ships battled in space above us. The pain was incredible, and I fought back tears as I laid there. Tucker appeared in my field of vision, and as I began to pass out, I realized that at least my family was safe. I woke up to a woman screaming. She was in a bed 10 feet away from me and covered in horrible burns. I was in an emergency room of some sort, and it was obvious the place was full to overflowing. A dozen doctors and 2 or 3 chosen empaths were trying to save as many as they could. At least 2 of the people around me had a sheet pulled over their faces, a sure sign things weren't going well. Kate leaned into my field of vision, and I felt relief fill her mind. She seemed to debate for a moment and then said, "Your right leg was crushed, John. Try not to move." 2 beds away, I could see Kautar. The Magi called Tirsa stood by his bed, obviously trying to control her emotions. An empath was talking to her, and I heard the man say, "He's too far gone. You'll just kill yourself if you do any more. Don't make me have security take you out of here." "You try and I'll rip this place apart," she said in a husky voice. I could tell in the link she meant it. The door behind Tirsa opened and Mike Rutger stepped in. I could see the look of horror on his face as he saw the long row of injured people in the room. Without hesitation, he stepped over to the burned woman. Her scream suddenly stopped and her eyes seemed transfixed as the man leaned over her. He said something to the woman too softly for me to hear. As I watched, her wounds began to heal. The pain left her face and became etched into the empath's face as he stood next to her. In mere seconds, the woman was all but healed. I'd never seen anyone healed this way and was frankly amazed. Rucker leaned back away from the bed, and I could see the fatigue flow over him. He glanced over at me and then at Kautar. Tirsa, her face bright red from pain and crying and on the verge of collapse, said, "Please, I can't do anything else and he's dying. Please help him." The earther hesitated, and I could see in the link he was debating. "Help the boy if you can," I growled through the pain. "I'll be fine." Kate gripped my shoulder hard enough that I almost yelped. The man leaned down over Kautar and placed his hand on the boy's forehead. Seconds passed, and suddenly the young Magi lurched on the bed as if he had just received a massive electric shock to his body. Tirsa slid to the floor and seemed to pass out. Kautar's face began to relax as though the pain was subsiding. I'm pretty sure I passed out for a while, because when I next awoke, Mr. Rutger was standing over me looking down. The pain in my legs was subsiding, and as Kate stepped back into my field of vision, I passed out again.